Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar this Tuesday morning with the Mnemonic and Proofpoint. My name is Stian, and some of you might know me from our previous seminars or from the Mnemonic sales team. Today, I will be your host and present to the speakers. For your information, this webinar will be recorded and published on the Mnemonic YouTube channel. In today's first presentation, we have Ole Christian and Adrian presenting their findings from assessing the email security of the top 500 largest companies in Norway. Ole Christian is part of our system integrations team here at Mnemonic and holds years of experience helping large organizations secure their email environments. Adrian from our chat intelligence team has experience from a variety of relevant incident response cases and from developing a custom security solutions. After Ole Christian and Adrian, we have Andrew Davis from Proofpoint. Andrew has been in the cybersecurity field for over 18 years with various roles, including business application leadership, technical account management, and as a global security architect. He is specialized in Microsoft and has broad experience with both email security and authentication. Today, he's joining us with his presentation, Is Microsoft Office 365 the attacker's new playground? Lastly, if you have any questions, you can submit these at any time through both presentations. And at the end, we will have a short Q&A session. If you cannot see the Q&A panel on the right side, just look for the question mark icon. The experience may be different depending on which platform you have connected through. When submitting a question, please select the All Panelist option. You could also send us an email directly with the email stated on the screen. That should be it for me now, and I'll hand it over to Ole Christian and Adrian.
Thank you for that, Stian. Welcome to the webinar. Today we'll talk about email, which might not seem like the most interesting theme. Nonetheless, one of the most important topics within our field of information security.
Yeah, so I'm Adrian. I work in our Managed Defense and Response department, more specifically within the Threat Intelligence group. So I both see and hear a lot, as IR is something the TI group is quite experienced with. I previously worked with development back when I worked in the same department as Ole and are a self-proclaimed Python ninja.
My name is Ole. I work in the Mnemonic System Integration department and have been working for several years with securing email channel for several large companies in our customer space. We have been working with email security or email authentication for quite some time and are working with the standards like DMARC and AUGMENT, which we will look into later on.
So the top infection vector is still email. According to the DBARC report from 2019, published by Verizon, 94% of all attacks start with an email. So one would think that since 94% of attacks start with email, email would be our main focus when we start securing our organization. But no, most organizations use way too much time on other things. We're not stating that those other things are not important. They are. But email seems to be hugely neglected. It's not sexy compared to EDR solutions promising to stop APT attacks or NGFVs promoting protection against mega giga attacks. Last time we had a similar talk. We wanted to talk about all the sexy stuff within the email sphere. But then we figured out that we should check the state of SPF and DMARC first. These are two very simple security mechanisms, as we'll demonstrate later. So to check this, we compiled a list of about 500 of the biggest companies in Norway and then pulled down all their SPF and DMARC records to create some statistics. The survey uncovered a surprising truth. Two of the most simple and fundamental security mechanisms in the email sphere are hugely underutilized. We'll go more into depth on both SPF and DMARC and of course a bit more about the survey itself.
But first, let's talk a little bit of what can go wrong. What do we see here is an email from a C-level executive to an employee in the finance department with an urgent call of action. The question here is, can she trust the sender in this email? The fact is, without email authentication in place, it's possible for an attacker to send a spoofed email like this and get a wire transfer of huge amount to the attacker's account. We see from research by the Anti-Phishing Working Group that an average $100,000 US are paid in each attack. So that's a huge amount of money that goes from legitimate companies to attackers' accounts. So starting in with SPF. Shortly, SPF is an access list in DNS. And DNS is, as you may know, the phone book of internet. It translates domain names into numeric IP address as computer uses. So similarly to the classical phone book, if I want to call Johnny Mnemonic, I do a lookup in the phone book to get his numeric phone number. And more in detail, we do here see dig command to query the DNS service to look up the SPF record of mnemonic.no. We see here that we got a result of SPF1 as a version number. The number, the mail service allowed to send mail on behalf of mnemonic.no. There's also a other server from a third party and an include of third parties sending services, in this case Questback. And at the very end, we have a policy which states, in this case, -all. And we will come back to what that means later. But as I said, SPF is an access list of which senders that are allowed to send on behalf of your domain in the DNS. So in fact, it's a list of IP addresses. So if we flatten the record above with only IP addresses, then it looks something like this.
Okay, as Ole mentioned, all or the last part of the record is actually really important. It tells the receiving end what to do with emails that are not being sent from the allowed list. So you can have 4 variations of this. You can have a plus in front, a question mark in front, a tilde in front, and a minus or a dash in front. So plus before means before all means to allow emails, all emails sent on behalf of your domain to be accepted. The question mark before all means you're neutral and that you're not sure whether the email sent from said mail server on your behalf is allowed or not. Tilde means you're under construction and trying to get control of what mail server should be allowed to send on your behalf. Emails not originating from allowed mail servers should be soft-failed. Minus means everything is in perfect order. This is where your organization wants to be. Emails not originating from the list of allowed mail servers are given the verdict hard fail. Then we have a rule that the record should not do more than 10 lookups. That means that if spf.protection.outlook.com also have includes in the record, you now have 2. So it's kind of a recursive thing. So it's really important to make sure you don't have more than 10 lookups within your SPF records. If you do, emails you send may fail because of this misconfiguration. Another important rule is that you're not allowed to have more than 255 characters per string. This can be solved by splitting the record into several strings. And then about the lookups. About 5% of all the top 500 companies we checked have too many lookups. The more worrying part is that a couple of those with this issue is on the top 10 list in Norway. More on this later. And again, this is a fairly technical explanation, and we don't expect everyone to know this by heart. It's just a demonstration of how easy it actually is. as this basically sums up how SPF works from your perspective. So I'll soon show you some numbers, but first, how did we perform this survey? We picked out a list of 500 largest companies in Norway. And then we had to automate some things and do a manual survey of all the domains or names and create a list of domains. And because 500 is quite a long list, we ended up with 368 domains, which we have manually vetted. Then we created some custom code to check the DNS records for said domain. This means that since we can do this and just check DNS for SPF and DMARC records, anyone else can do so, even a threat actor, which means that a threat actor can pull down DNS records from a really huge list of domains and then choose and pick their targets based on that list. So that's important to know. Okay, so back to the policies. Since policies is one of the things that determine what to do with emails not originating from an allowed server, it's really important to configure it right. Luckily, it's good to see that 70% of all companies configuring SPF uses the -all policy, which means that emails not originating from the allowed email server list are being rejected. And that's a really good thing. And then 27% have configured the policy to be ~all, which means soft fail. That's also okay. Preferably everybody should jump over to -all. And then 3% have configured their SPF record to contain the ~all, which means they're probably not sure about what to do when emails are not being sent from one of the allowed origins. And lastly, 0% had the allow all emails, so that's a good thing. It's a fun fact is that this RFC is 15 years old, so it's good to see that 70% are compliant with this.
So let's talk a bit about DMARC. DMARC gives instructions if the recipient cannot prove that the email comes from who it seems to come from. And seems to be important. There are two kinds of sender fields in an email. We have the envelope from, or also called the return path. That's the one you can similarly say on the back of the envelope when you send them a letter in the mail. This is the one the SPF checks. And then you have the header from, the one that is visible to the user. And DMARC do a verification if the domains in the header from align with the envelope from or domain in a DKIM signature. Which means, back to the example that I showed previously, we can see that how the recipient can trust that in fact the sender is the real source, is that DMARC is aligning those domains from the visible one to the trusted one in SPF. As we see in the example here, this mail from domain is from froster.net and the header from is for rift.com. So a bit more about DMARC. As technical in DNS, it shows the version number. It says something about a P, which is the policy. And we will come back to that in the later slide. The important part here is the email address. Because another thing with DMARC is that you can send reports back to the sender organization. So you can specify an email address that you want to receive reports from the recipients of what do they do with the email that eventually fail or not or passes DMARC from your organization.
Okay, so usage of DMARC. As Ole mentioned, we have 3 different policies we can set in our record. So you have the policy none, quarantine, and reject. None means you're under construction and are trying to get an overview of how DMARC will affect your email flow. And then we have quarantine, which means you're under construction, but moving the burden of deciding whether to reject mail or not over to the receiving end. In essence, you tell them to decide whether to quarantine the email or not by saying you don't have control at your end. And we'll also discuss later how and what you should do to avoid using the quarantine policy. And then you have reject. This is where your organization should be. This tells the receiving end that emails not passing DMARC should be rejected. And then, as Ole mentioned, we also have the aggregated reports, or RUA part, which tells what email address should receive reports from your organizations or the receiving organization. And no reporting address is like walking in the blind. A fun fact here is that 8% of the organizations we checked are missing RUA, and some even have the courage to do so with a reject policy, which means that they can't see what's going on with their email flow. They won't get reports telling them that emails originating from you are being rejected. So, status Norway, about 54% of all the records we checked are missing DMARC entirely. That's really bad. Preferably everybody should be on the reject side, but of course you have to start somewhere. So even though none is doing nothing, it's better to be on none than have no record at all. And then 23% again have configured the policy to be none. 9% have configured the policy to be quarantine, and 14% have configured the policy to be reject. So 14% are doing the right thing. That's not enough, so we hope everybody attending this webinar can take a look at their own DMARC configuration, and if it's missing, please start to consider using DMARC. A consequence of this is that domains are easier to spoof. Example, fake invoices seemingly sent from a legit source.
So why is this lack of focus on DMARC? What we often meet when we are out helping organizations getting compliant with the standards or enhancing their email security is that they find it maybe too difficult to implement the standards. They are seems to be too complex or too time consuming to implement. And many organizations have email as their nerve in their organization. And they are by that too concerned about breaking email delivery. In fact, if they do enable DMARC, will they break something with the email delivery? And then the third point might be that the uncertainty of the prioritization of the organization's baseline. What are the low-hanging fruits of doing a security enhancement on the email channel? So I will give you a short list on how to do this. So first step, get in control of your domains. This is maybe a challenging part where you need to get overview of all the domains that are sending email and that are not sending email, and get in control of the DNS configuration of each of them. Second, regain ownership of all your sending services. That means get in control of the newsletter service, the Salesforce, the AWS CES, and all other applications that are sending emails on behalf of your domain. Third, enable DMARC monitoring. Set a none policy and set up a reporting address pointing to a DMARC tool of your choice, and start looking into the data that is coming into that tool. And the fourth point is establish SPF on all domains and enable DKIM where possible. And by all domains, also those who are not sending emails. And then start this process of continuously monitoring and correcting the SPF reports based on the data in the DMARC tool and continue with that for a period of time until you get confident. And when you're confident of your implementation, then go directly to DMARC reject. This might take from 3 weeks in some organizations to maybe 6 to 9 months in larger organizations. But as Adrian mentioned, don't put the burden on the quarantine of the recipient. And then the second point is enforce your DMARC inbound. Adhere to the standard and reject emails that are not compliant with DMARC in your receiving email system. And the third point, send reports. Participate in the community and send reports back to the senders organizations. And if you're concerned about GDPR, you can control the forensic reports, which we have not talked about in detail, but they are more verbose and can contain body data. So an example of that is to put your RUF record and point that to an internal mailbox. So the conclusion, regain control of your email domains. And that might be the most challenging part, because there is a lot of shadow IT and applications that you didn't know were sending emails that are sending emails. So you need to base it on a good DMARC data tool. And with that, all this said, DMARC is a basic security measure. And this is something that should be prioritized highly before you start spending your whole budget on hunting advanced threat actors.
So yeah, that's all for us. Now it's your turn to check your own domains. And our friends from Proofpoint have created a tool, as you can see here, which you can use to check both your SPF records and DMARC records. So that's all.
Andrew, you're up.
Yeah, thanks guys. Sorry about that. Just sharing my second screen. Just bear with me while I get the presentation up. Can you hear me okay?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. All right. Good morning, everybody. So my name is Andy Davis, and I'm the SE Competitive Intelligence representative for EMEA. And the presentation today really is about how Proofpoint can complement a Microsoft 365 investment. And the title is, is Microsoft 365 the attacker's new playground? And there's a reason for this. Is because, Microsoft is very, very different to other vendors, competitors in the market, because you can buy a Microsoft license online with a credit card. And if I can do that, if you can do that, then why can't the attackers? And that's really the point of the presentation today. It's not, a rip and replace on Microsoft. It's about how we at Proofpoint can help complement that investment that's already been made in Microsoft. So a bit of a disclaimer here. This presentation is prepared for Proofpoint employees, registered partners, etc., etc. Please contact us if you want to use this material. Obviously, Mnemonic are putting this on their YouTube channel, which is absolutely fine. So let's get into the presentation. to start with, you know, we'll look at the threat landscape in 2021, and you know, one of the main reasons for this really is the avalanche of unique URLs leading to file sharing sites. So we're seeing huge amounts of file sharing abuse where attacks, etc., and malware and the bad stuff is actually originating from those legitimate file sharing sites such as OneDrive, SharePoint, also on the Google side as well. The other thing is regarding ransomware. So, you know, ransomware is in the email vector specifically is growing, but at second stage. So we at Proofpoint, we work with endpoint vendors, CrowdStrike, VMware to coordinate the telemetry, the intel and the actions, and new actors are in this space as well as the new affiliates, and this is really a rapidly growing space. These sort of smaller companies rarely end up in the headlines and often don't have the financial or technical expertise to properly handle the incident or perform the proper remediation required to prevent a repeat attack. And the thing with ransomware is, you know, it very commonly it starts with an email attack, and 9 times out of 10 organizations don't realize they've been hit by ransomware until it reaches the endpoint. And when it reaches the endpoint, you know, the endpoint detection mechanisms like CrowdStrike, etc., will, you know, start to show an increase of disk usage and encryption of files, etc., etc. But by that time, it's too late, and then you need a you know, a kind of IR type capability to really go back and fix the issue. Whereas we're stopping that at the gateway level, and we're identifying that through a number of different methods. But really, you know, ransomware is one thing, but the biggest threat to organizations right now is the supply chain and BEC attacks. And you can see the statistics there. You know, it's really about the social engineering side of things and making people click links and reply to emails and really focusing on the psychology of a person rather than hitting the infrastructure. This is just another, you know, another slide to say about the rise of ransomware. And it's really, really important. If you look at the Rise in Data Breach Investigation report, which is on the right-hand side, 85% of all attacks involved a human element. So, you know, these things can be addressed by such measures as security awareness training, or, as I said before, stopping at the gateway and giving that visibility and reporting into exactly what's going on in your organization. And later on in the presentation, I'll go through some of that with you. But, you know, 101% increase in ransomware, and 36% of that ransomware involved phishing, and 61% involved credentials. So these are really startling statistics, and these are the conversations that we have very, very regularly with our customers. So this is just a bit of a graphic about, you know, ransomware, how hackers hunt, the attack chain leveraging initial access broker. So essentially, a threat actor sends emails containing a malicious Office document. So once again, originating or mimicking, you know, a Microsoft trusted file, if you like. A user then downloads the document and enables macros, which drops a malware payload. The actor leverages the backdoor access to exfiltrate system information. Now, the initial access broker can sell access to another threat actor, which is equally important. And Cobot Strike, via the malware backdoor access, enables lateral movement within the network. So what you've got to remember is, you know, these bad actors, these guys, they all want the same goal. It's either going to be monetary gain or gaining the keys to the kingdom. And what I mean by keys to the kingdom is your credentials, your database access, all the information that you want to keep secure from the outside. And this is just really emphasizing what I've been talking about here. Yes, ransomware, 90% successful attacks via email. We've got a breakdown here from the Covert Q21 ransomware report, where it actually breaks down by vector, by company size as well. So email phishing in the 25,000 to 50,000 bracket is 100%. So that's really the target market, and that's due to a number of things. So maybe, you know, a reduced security budget, something like the need not to do security awareness training, or the perception not to do security awareness training, things like that. But if you look in the middle of this slide here, you know, you can see BEC is the largest loss combined to all with 51%. And then when you look at the data breaches side of things as well, 85% start with people. And this really ties into how Proofpoint address things differently to all of our other competitors, essentially. And that's with the people-centric approach. And it even says down there, you know, the top 3 enterprise risks are all people-centric. So what we're doing within Proofpoint, if you don't already know, is we are focusing on the people within the organization rather than the technology. We understand that it's all about protecting the people, and also ultimately giving visibility and reporting to you guys to make sure that your organizations are safe and is at minimum risk. So this is just some of the stuff here, and you know, once again, we understand that a lot of you and companies all over the world have made a huge investment in Microsoft E3, E5, whatever license it is, and we're here to really plug the gaps. There's a perception that, you know, good enough is good enough, but it's not. Sometimes it's not. So we've got here the core gaps, and you can see that, you know, there's a number of years delay between the Proofpoint initiative and where Microsoft are catching up. And the thing with Microsoft is that they are not just a security specialist partner. They also have the, you know, the business drivers, the productivity tools that come along with the E5 and E3 licenses. And sometimes the security side of a purchase of an E3 or an E5 is secondary to the productivity tools. And this is where we come in to really complement that investment. Unfortunately, at the moment, you know, Microsoft don't do anything around the BC and supply chain piece or URL isolation. So isolating those links that appear in your inbox at first, before they're even clicked, essentially. And then account takeovers are really, really key as well. And what we're tending to find is, you know, we're revisiting conversations with customers that have previously taken Microsoft and thought that, you know, it was good enough, but have suddenly come back and wanted to take on that layered approach with either ourselves or, you know, other competitors. But we're typically seeing that in a, you know, a 7.2 month average of customers returning. So Ule and Adrian mentioned about DMARC and BEC, and I've obviously talked about BEC in some detail already. You know, identity deception and the cost of doing nothing. So phishing, as you know, phishing is once again the most popular action. 36% of breaches originate from a phishing attack, which is a 25% increase in 1 year. BEC is where, you know, someone tries to be you. So don't confuse BEC with EAC. So EAC, email actual compromise, and BEC, business email compromise, are two very different things. EAC is where they actually do become you and send from your organization. BEC is where they pretend to be you and spoof. The data breach cost, as you can see here, you know, 3.86 million. And we've talked specifically about DMARC, which obviously stands for Domain-Based Monitoring and Reporting and Conformance. And what DMARC does, as the guys mentioned, is it combines the authentication of the SPF, which we went in great detail, and also DKIM signing as well, and combines that and provides what's called the RUA and RUF data, which gives the information to providers such as ourselves why a mail has potentially failed DMARC. And we talked a little bit about, you know, the policies, none. So monitoring, we monitor all the email. The email has a DMARC record associated with it, but we're not actually taking action. Or quarantine, where, you know, it's been deemed as a fail with DMARC, but we're not actually blocking that email. We're just sending that to the spam, the junk email folder. Or then obviously there's reject, where the mail is rejected, and rightly so. So if we go on to the next one here, our solution within Proofpoint to combat all of this that I've just spoke about is what we call email fraud defense. And this provides the industry leading tools and world-class professional services to help you get and break that deception. So we've mentioned DMARC and comprehensive brand protection. You know, we're providing visibility into all emails being sent using your trusted domains, including third-party senders. And that's, you know, 5 billion emails a day, 8,000 plus secure email gateways. With the hosted SPF service, we mentioned, and the guys mentioned about the 10 DNS query lookup limit, and how you have to structure your SPF record to make sure that that limit isn't reached and mail fails. Well, with hosted SPF, you don't have that problem, because with hosted SPF, it's a macro database that replaces the DNS, so you don't have that lookup limit. And what that means to you really is that your SPF record or your database is a lot cleaner looking, because you're not going to have, you know, hundreds of thousands of IP addresses that you need to keep up to date, and you can use those host names, which could result in round robins or DNS, DNS round robins, where you've got multiple clusters underneath the host name, etc. So all of these things come into play, and we offer our EFD as a managed service. So all of the complexities that the guys mentioned about getting to reject and why organizations are put off by that fact, we take that away from you, because we work with you and work with the business units that send on behalf of your domain and make sure that it's all legitimate authenticated email. Not only that, with EFD, we look at the lookalike domain abuse. So 400 million domains scanned continually. And, we're the only supplier that looks into the supplier risk part of the profile as well, because we understand and we're very aware that VEC isn't just attacks on your business as such, it's your suppliers as well, and pretending to be your suppliers to get into your business. So this is just a little bit more about how we can simplify your DMARC journey. EFD is a managed service, so detect, identify, manage, design, authenticate, and block. You get a dedicated managed services consultant. It's a fully customized project implementation plan. So our guys will work directly with the customer to make sure that, you know, this part, and as the guys mentioned, this is basic email security, essentially DMARC, that you are in a good starting position, and those high priority domains are at reject. And what we also do is look at all of the application email. So this is just a little bit more about the hosted SPF side. So overcoming the DNS lookup limit, reduce overhead of making SPF updates, etc. The other key thing about hosted SPF is we actually obfuscate your published SPF record, so no one can see where your SPF record points to, which is equally as important, especially in the attacker's point of view. The other thing about this is that the application mail, we can segregate the application mail using what's called secure email relay services. And what we're doing there is, there's various reasons why application email may be non-compliant. And this includes, sender cannot sign with DKIM. There's insufficient DKIM key encryption level, which is always a key error. And sender does not support SPF alignment, and this goes back to the soft hard fails and whether an entry is in SPF record or not, and if they actually use SPF as an authentication method. And the other thing is the sender's platform may be vulnerable. So authorizing dozens of application senders to use our domains is time consuming at most, and in some cases maybe even impossible. So those that we do authorize are sending email from environments outside of our security posture, widening the attack surface involving identity takeover. So essentially what we're doing is we're separating that application mail, making sure that application mail is secure. We're authenticating it and authorizing it. We're scanning the content, we're aligning it to DMARC, and we're signing it with DKIM. And then what that means for the recipient is secure, compliant application email. And these are also called third-party senders. So these are the, your Salesforces, your Marketos that send on behalf of your organization. And you want to make sure that those emails are being delivered correctly. The other thing with DMARC and the advantage of DMARC, and I know we're getting pushed for time, the other thing about DMARC is BIMI. So not only is it a great security standard, it's also really good for brand advertising. So, when you do have those DMARC authenticated domains, you can have BIMI records. You need to be in an active policy, so it's either a reject or a quarantine. But what it does is it will put your logo onto those web emails, and you can see in the diagram below, the before BIMI and the after BIMI. And essentially, it's a logo of your business, which is wrapped with a certificate, so an authentication certificate. Which means there's a greater chance of it being delivered. So we've touched on IFD, we've touched on DMARC, we've touched on a number of things, and this is really why it's important to have a trusted security partner, along with the Microsoft investment that you may have already had. And we've already talked about advanced BEC detection, which is a huge risk to organizations. And unfortunately, at the moment, Microsoft don't do anything about that. They partner with a DMARC provider, Valleymail, regarding DMARC authentication, but all the other stuff, so the Domain Discover, the Supplier Risk Explorer, all the advanced BEC capabilities that we have at Proofpoint, unfortunately, they don't cover that, and not many organizations cover that anyway. With regard to advanced threats, QuickTime URL sandboxing, this is really important as well, and we'll go through some examples later on in the presentation where Microsoft, where customers are in active POCs with us, with Microsoft as the first layer and us as the next hop, and we've discovered a number of misses from the Microsoft side, and it's really important to kind of detail why those things have been missed. So this is how we protect and augment M365. Secure your organization from targeted and advanced attacks, and I'll go into that in a bit more detail. Protect your users, end users, executives, and VAPs. So VAPs is a term that we use within Proofpoint, which relates to very attacked people. And very attacked people are people that are attacked more than your average user. And what we do is classify that. We have what's called an attack index score, and it really pertains to, what type of campaign has targeted that individual. Is it a targeted? Is it widespread? What the kind of risk level is, etc., etc. And then we score that, and then we display that within our targeted attack protection dashboard to allow you to see, you know, you have 360 VAPs that are 2.4 times more attacked than your average user. And what we can do there is we can apply what's called tap isolation to those users, and also create security awareness training platform and content for those particular users where things that are, you know, where targets and attacks are against those people specifically. And then the other part is automate response and resilience process, and the visibility and reporting, which I'll go into in a bit more detail later on. This is all about, you know, what we're doing, and we call it the Nexus Threat Graph. Essentially, it's all of our threat intelligence and our sharing of information across multiple platforms. I'm not going to go into every single statistic in detail in front there, but as you can see, you know, there's huge numbers, and we're putting in 18 years worth of integrated email experience, you know, leading vendor on the market, etc. And we're combining that with sharing that intelligence across all of our platforms, whether it's email, whether it's cloud protection with CASB, as I said before, security awareness training. So we know the content and the education that needs to happen in the first place for organizations to reduce the risk. This is just an example of what we call the Nexus People Risk Explorer. So this is a dashboard which gives you an overall risk status of your organization, individuals, and why those risk levels are appropriate. If we click on it, you know, you can see here that this particular user has a clicker vulnerability, a high clicker vulnerability. They haven't completed certain aspects of security awareness training, and all of these things play into why that would be an overall risk. So what this is doing is giving you as a customer a greater visibility on where things need to maybe be addressed, or, as I said, security awareness training programs be put in place, or if you've got CASB and cloud access security is part of that as well, then, you know, all of that feeds into this NPRE dashboard. Proofpoint delivers an integrated end-to-end platform. So email and cloud threat detection, which we've talked about briefly. The supplier risk protection, which goes hand in hand with the EFD and the BEC type protection, and really protecting the supply chain partners and vendors. Browser isolation and automated response. So we've also got the ability to retroactively take action against threats that actually do land in your inbox. And what you'll see in the number of examples in a moment is that attackers target those shared mailboxes, and they specifically do in Microsoft, because if if a threat doesn't have a threat ID or a hash associated with it through EOP or Defender for Office, formerly ATP, then the ZAP can't do anything with the remediation side of things. So this really adds to the manual tasks and the PowerShell and et cetera, to bring back and remediate and pull those mails out of the mailbox. And then, as I mentioned, the user training and participation, which feeds into the Nexus People Risk Explorer. So this is a really key slide, and this really shows the evolution of the threat landscape. And we've already focused very heavily on BEC and supply chain attacks, and absolutely so, because these are the main sources of threat from 2019 to present day. And whereas the scale has normally been widespread and maybe mass mailer attacks and those worms that, you know, used to infect systems left, right, and center, these are very targeted, and they prey on the psychological side of things. So the BEC and the the business email compromise and the the psychological side. I need this payment now, and there's not necessarily there's not necessarily a URL or a payload or an attachment that accompanies these BEC attacks. Sometimes it's just plain text emails that get through all other defenses, but luckily we have something called Supernova, which I'll go into in more detail. I'm just conscious of time, so I'm going to just go through some of these in a moment. This is a really good example here of an Office 365 credential phish that we saw with, as I said, an anonymized POC. So to start with, there was a friendly display name. It was sent to the IT department, so a shared link. It mimicked the productivity tool for Microsoft for the phonetic system, but it was actually going to this PHP. So when it was clicked, the Microsoft pop-up box came up and the credentials could be entered, but it's actually harvesting the credentials from your Microsoft account. So what that would have done is essentially led to an account compromise. Why Microsoft missed this hybrid threat? It's really to do with the fact that there wasn't a payload, and that's one of the key things to really take away from this. Is if there's a link that doesn't lead to a payload, then Microsoft tend to deem it safe, and obviously allow it through. And as I said, if it's deemed and allowed safe, then the retrospective action that you can take on that is very limited and very manual as well. This is just an overview of how we complement the Microsoft side of things. So Microsoft is very much reputation based, password file analysis, etc. What we're doing as well is we're extracting the URL. We've got the ML feedback loop, which, as I said, feeds into all of our detection capabilities and our retroactive capabilities as well. And obviously we've got evasion prevention detection as well, because as I mentioned right at the start, you can buy a license from Microsoft online with a credit card. The bad guys do it. They craft those very clever attacks to circumnavigate all of the Microsoft defenses essentially, and there's a huge higher attack success rate when they do that. So that's something to kind of really bear in mind. I'm just going to go through these other examples as well here. Just bear with me 2 seconds. Yeah, and this is another key one. So this is a Boomerang story here. 1,500 mailboxes. Essentially, the push was for a Microsoft investment on its own. They moved to E5, and then in August 2020 they moved back to Proofpoint because of the flood of spear phishing and the huge false positive rates, etc. So there's a number of things that added to this being a decision that the customer ultimately had to make. But as I said, we complement Microsoft investments very well, because we plug those gaps that even Microsoft are aware that they have. And that's what I wanted to show you today. Just bear with me because I need to put another slide up. Let me just.
Thank you so much, guys. There has been submitted several questions today, actually. So we'll go through some of them and we'll answer the rest by email afterwards. The first one being if we're sharing the presentations. the webinar is recorded and will be uploaded to youtube.com/mnemonic. For Ole Christian and Adrian, we have a question mentioning a few other internet standards recommended by EU and required in several EU countries. He's wondering if you have collected data on this in your survey, and if you have any opinion on the support of these standards in your products and services, and the need for using them in today's threat landscape.
So yeah, regarding the data collection part, no, we did not collect data on this in our survey, as we look at this as something you need to look at after fixing SPF and DMARC, so we didn't find it relevant for this presentation.
We do appreciate and support the thought or the opinion of that these standards are important, and as you mentioned here in the question, that the DNSSEC require, or the extensive use of DNS in SPF and DMARC requires DNSSEC to be fully trusted. But we also see that in the threat landscape, and to the question about the opinion of the threat landscape and this relevance for these standards, is that if you can control, if you're a man in the middle and can control the DNS queries, then you probably are talking about actors that are nation state or very advanced. So we are trying to aim on the low-hanging fruit here, the baseline or the basic stuff like DMARC and SPF first.
And then it's sort of the same question for you, Andrew. What are the plans at Proofpoint to support and use DNSSEC, DANE, TLS, RPT, etc.?
So TLS is in opportunistic or enforced, because with TLS there's capabilities and there's the option to have just enforced TLS with a gateway level anyway. So there, what we've talked about here this morning is a combination of the gateway, our protection server, but also the advanced threat protection piece and our email fraud defense as well. So with normal, general security email protocols, and ARC is another one, we're heavily supporting all of those anyway within the configurations within the gateway.
Thank you. The last one also for you, Andrew. Any idea on when to expect fat mail clients like Outlook, Apple, Thunderbird to be supported to support BIMI?
Yeah, so BIMI was in pilot to start with Yahoo Mail, and then Gmail became part of that as well. So the adoption is growing rapidly, and more people are wanting to use BIMI. Microsoft have their own thing. Microsoft don't use BIMI; they use what's called brand cards, which is very similar but easier to mimic and spoof. The biggest thing about BIMI is that it leads to a logo with a secure certificate, and you have to be DMARC enabled with a active policy to allow, to implement BIMI as well. So we host the BIMI records as well. So yeah, absolutely. It's down to those providers to get on board with BIMI rather than for Proofpoint. And as soon as they do, we'll be there with the support for them.
Thank you. So that's it for the questions today. Remember, you can always send us an email at contact@mnemonic.io if you have any questions, and we will have our technical guys answer it as soon as possible. Thank you so much for participating in our webinar this morning. This would be the last webinar of the year, so we really hope you liked it. And a big thank you from the whole Mnemonic team. Look out for our invitation to our Christmas breakfast seminar in Oslo very soon. I wish you all a wonderful day, and see you next time.